I am the ghost of Maria Callas, and I have come here today to be with you, my caro public, and to try to tell you in a short time what it was like to be Maria Callas, prima donna assoluta. I would also like to tell you what it was like to be Maria Callas, the woman. As a woman, I loved deeply, and just like the women I portrayed on the stage, I was destroyed by that love. I was born American, but I am Greek. Greek in my art, in my blood, in my destiny. Like the great figures of the Greek tragedy, the gods gave me everything: wealth, success, talent, beauty, the drive necessary to assume the pinnacle of my world and hold it. And then with these same gifts, they destroyed me. To tell you somehow what my life was like, I'd like to tell you the story of one night in Chicago at the Chicago Lyric Theater. It was 1956. And I had sung the previous season in Chicago, and it had been an enormous triumph. The Chicago Lyric was trying to launch itself on the world stage of opera, and they knew that if they had a star of my stature, that they would be in that arena. And so they had been willing to give me whatever I wanted to sing with them, and it had worked very well. We had had an enormously successful season in 1955. Crowds at the airport, long ovations, wonderful reception in the press. And so in 1956, I was invited back. And I was to sing the role of Madame Butterfly. And it was so successful that they asked, and I agreed, to a fifth and additional performance. One of the things that the Chicago Lyric had guaranteed me is that they would protect me from a nuisance lawsuit. But on the night of that last performance, there were such enormous crowds, and there was such a long ovation, 27 curtain calls. I was absolutely elated. It was stupendous. And I left the stage and I went back to my dressing room, and as soon as I opened the door, I could see this cop, this man there in his trench coat, and he came at me and he thrust this paper in my kimono. It was a summons I knew without looking at it. And I told him, "You get out of here! How dare you come into my dressing room? I am Maria Callas. You can't sue me. I cannot be sued. Get them out of here! Get them out!" Of course, there were photographers everywhere, and I knew the minute that I saw the flashbulbs go that these would be the pictures that would be in the paper. And I was right. The next day, the pictures in the paper were not of me on stage. They were not of my 20-minute ovation. No, they were pictures of me in my righteous anger. And this somehow was the story of Callas. On the one hand, a goddess, adored, sought out, applauded. And always, on the other hand, the tigress, hunted, hated, despised, and tormented. My career began in much the same way as many young singers' careers begin. I was conservatory trained in Athens during the war. We, like so many other people in Europe, were more or less marooned in Athens during that time. And among the other refugees was the great Spanish soprano Elvira de Hidalgo, who was my first teacher. I was an absolutely voracious student. I went not only to my lessons, but to everyone's lessons. I would take a score home at night. Materials were so scarce during that time that I really couldn't keep them, and I would memorize it overnight and come back to work on it the next day. And at the end of the war, by the end of that time, I was singing leading roles for the Athens Opera, much to the consternation of my fellow students and the other people in the company. But when the war was over, I wanted to be out of Athens. I wanted to be away from my mother, who was such an incredible driving force and yet such a torment. There was one ship sailing from Athens, and anyone with an American passport, which I had, could sail on it. And although De Hidalgo said I should stay in Europe, I was on that ship. When I arrived in New York, I did what singers do. I made phone calls, I made the rounds, I auditioned. In fact, I auditioned for Edward Johnson at the Metropolitan, and he offered me 2 roles. He offered me the roles of Butterfly and of Leonora in Fidelio. But I turned him down. My friends were very upset. Maria, how can you do this? How can you turn such a thing down? But I didn't think that he really understood who I was. And I didn't want to sing at the Metropolitan unless it was on my terms. I never regretted turning that down. Then, through a series of connections, I received a contract to sing in Verona. And I sailed back across the Atlantic with my cloth coat and just a few dollars in my pocket. I was full of expectation. I was well prepared. My ankles were swollen. And right away, I met a gentleman there, Battista Meneghini. Battista Meneghini was a man much older than I. He was a wealthy industrialist. He was a patron of the opera in Verona. And he simply took me under his wing. He sent me to his physician. He hired coaches for me. He began to manage my career, really, from the beginning. And it wasn't long before we had arrived at a certain intimate arrangement. And I began to play all the small houses in Italy, the provincial houses. Of course, I had my eye on the stage of La Scala. That was where I belonged. At that time, there was a young singer there, very popular, named Renata Tebaldi. Tebaldi with the voice of an angel. There were to be many comparisons between Callas and Tebaldi. And it's true, she did have a very beautiful voice. And my voice was always dark, with all of the hidden emotions of the human condition. Tito was a very comfortable, a very functional person. And I made him happy by playing the role of the adoring wife. Many people have asked, were we happy? Did I really love this man? Well, I never took on a role that I didn't believe in and come to make real. We were satisfied. So in 1949, just before I was to sail for South America on a concert tour, we were married. This tour included myself and a number of young singers. And we were to sing both concerts and operas. Renata Tebaldi was among them. And this is the way in which the famous Callas-Tebaldi feud blew into open flame. One night, we were singing a concert, and each artist was to perform their numbers, and then their individual number, and then retire from the stage. But when Tebaldi finished singing her number, she stayed on stage and sang a second, and then a third, and then a fourth number. You may well imagine when she got off stage, I let her know exactly what I thought of that kind of thing. Of course, the press was there, and immediately they made a big thing out of this. And then, as is the way with these things, people began to divide up and to take sides. And for years afterwards, I would be singing, and Renata's people, her claque, would come into the house and sit up in the balcony, and try to disrupt my performances. They would hiss and boo. Many times I sang them into silence. The day after the concert, this fat little impresario called me into his office and he said, "Madam Meneghini, I don't like the way you sang. I'm paying you off." "You don't like the way I sing? Why, you filthy little..." There was this brass paperweight on his desk, and I picked it up, and I went over there, and I was going to brain him with it. Of course, everyone came and took it away from me and held me back. So I kicked him. And it wasn't long before I was back on the stage of La Scala with the contract that I wanted, singing the roles that I thought I should sing. One of the roles that I sang often in those years was the role of Aida. Aida is an exotic story. It's the story of an Ethiopian princess who has been captured in a great war between Ethiopia and Egypt and brought as a slave to the court of the Princess Amneris. There is a valiant young captain in the Egyptian army, Radames, and if he is victorious in this great war, he will be considered a suitable consort for the princess. But Radames and Aida have seen each other and fallen hopelessly in love, much against both of their wills. Aida is not just a young woman. She is a savage and noble woman, and she understands fully that the nature of this love is treason. But she agrees to meet with Radames at night by the banks of the Nile and deceive him into revealing the whereabouts of the Egyptian army. You can imagine the emotions that tear at her heart. She stands by the banks of the Nile and she imagines, what if he does not come? What if he comes and says he will never see her again? What then? Better to throw herself into the Nile and find oblivion. And then her thoughts turn to the land of her birth, which she will never see again. The arching blue skies, the green valleys. Oh, patria mia. No more. Qui Radames operatic career. There's what you do on stage, and there's how you play the field in the world of opera. And I would do two things. I would go out on stage, and I would make them love me. I would make them wild, so that Ghiranghelli at La Scala and Edward Johnson at the Metropolitan understood that they needed me more than I needed them. And then I would make them pay, enough so that I knew that they understood who I was. I'll tell you how it was for me. I was always the complete professional, well-prepared, hard-working. I demanded a great deal, not only of myself, but of my colleagues. But when I stepped out on that stage, everything became real for me. I really was Violetta. I really was Medea. And I was never more really myself. There are so many levels of reality for a performer. Where are we in this 200-page work? Where am I on stage? Am I in the light? Am I too close to the pit? Or my mouth is dry? Or some dolt is standing on my costume? All of these things you must be aware of. You must deal with them. Or I'm coming to a particularly difficult passage of music. The singing voice is divided into registers, the low, middle, and high registers. And depending on how high you're singing, the place where these registers meet are called breaks in your voice. And it is the art of the opera singer to be able to sing over these breaks in a fashion that makes them inaudible to the audience. And every now and then you get a piece of music that's simply written right across the break. So you must focus all of your attention and all of your skill to be able to negotiate this. And you must be aware of all of this. But these things are really nothing compared to what is happening on stage, to the story. I really am Norma. I really am Amina. And even this is not so real as the music, this sublime music that illuminates and expands our hearts. Even at the end of my career, when my voice and my life were not always in my control, I could walk out onto a moonlit stage into an ancient, sacred grove, and I could be the Norma, the Druid priestess. And I could pray. Not perform, you understand, but pray. O chaste goddess, casta diva, temper our ardent hearts. Reign in our hearts as you do in heaven. this is what it is to act, to make something real. Luchino Visconti saw this in my work. Luchino was the foremost film director of his day. He was a very controversial man. He was openly communist, openly homosexual, a very vulgar person, but he was such an artist. He used to say he was born at La Scala, and yet when he decided that he would like to work with me, it took 3 years to arrange this. You might think that someone of the stature of Visconti could simply call La Scala and tell them that he would like to work there. But there are no empty places in the world of opera. There are more directors than there are theaters. There are more divas than there are roles. And so it took a long time with Luchino writing me long letters after my performances and really courting me to create a connection with La Scala. Tita didn't like this man. He found him very, very vulgar. Tita and I had such a bourgeois life together, and really this was necessary. I lived in the midst of such turmoil and such controversy that it was very important to me to have a calm center. But Luchino was such an iconoclast. He was always upsetting everyone around him. And yet, he understood that every phrase, every note has a meaning. And he was ready and eager to do the work necessary to find some way to reveal that meaning. In fact, in our years of working together, we often enjoyed taking an opera that was considered to be perhaps second rank or even trivial and investing in it the meaning that was latent in the music. I remember we spent one whole afternoon working on one small aria from La Sonnambula. La Sonnambula is the story of a village girl who is a sleepwalker, La Sonnambula. And she has been found in a number of compromising positions, not really that compromising, but by her fiancé, and he has broken off with her. And of course she's heartbroken. And toward the end of the opera, she walks way up high above a big turning mill wheel on a little catwalk, something she could never do awake. And the whole village is gathered below, including her fiancé, and they realize that she is sleepwalking. She comes down off the mill wheel and sings this aria. She says she has a little nosegay of flowers that her lover had given her, and she sees that they are wilted. And she says, "How could these flowers be wilted in only one short day? And yet, my love withered away in only one short day. If I cry, perhaps my tears will revive these flowers, but they can never revive my love." So we spent one afternoon working this way. Let me hear just the opening chords. A little more slowly, please. These are sobs. This is my grief. My grief. And now, you want me to come from upstage here? Let me hear that one more time. And take the flowers over to someone there. Oh, I see, okay. Would somebody please bring me a bouquet? Go on, let's hear the rest. this music is like a heartbeat, like grief, like weeping. So all right, let's just take it from the top then. I'll hand someone one of the flowers over here, and then there'll be some more people over here. Okay. All right. Famous, I was adored, and yet somehow I was always the fat, ugly, unloved little girl. Somehow when the applause was at its greatest, my dissatisfaction would be at its height. Happiness never seemed to be for me.
Il pianto mio
Gioacchino Visconti, Franco Zeffirelli, Leonard Bernstein, Dimitri Mitropoulos, Tullio Serafin. I worked with them all. And we were all students of our art. And it was art that we made. What is art but the bringing to consciousness of the deeper streams of human life? I was at the height of my fame in 1957 when I met Aristotle Onassis. It was at a ball in Venice given by Elsa Maxwell. And all the beautiful people were there. Mr. Onassis, I'm so pleased to meet you. Well, of course I know who you are. Everyone knows who you are. Well, you're very kind. I'm afraid our schedule really won't permit us to. Well, that's very generous of you. Tita, I'd like you to meet someone. My husband, Battista Meneghini, Aristotle Onassis. Tita, Mr. Onassis has offered us the use of his motor launch and 2 sailors for this entire week. Oh, I'm sure we can find some time. Well, we did find time. We spent the entire week shopping, going to nightclubs. We spent time on the Christina. And everywhere we went, this man, Onassis, was the life of the party. He was at one time completely in control of everyone and everything, and at the same time, a buffoon. One afternoon we were in a little bar in Venice, very, very exclusive. And here are all these women draped in diamonds. You know, you could almost not get a table in this place unless you were in the paper every day. And they were all very impressed with themselves for being there. Aristo took a big white handkerchief out of his pocket and wrapped it around his eyes and was going around like this, bumping into all of these really elegant people, you know. And I was absolutely in stitches. I mean, they were just so upset, and it was hilarious. I don't recall ever laughing like that. In fact, at the end of that week, I knew my life had to change. I know that everyone has always seen me as being very capricious, but you must understand how it was. To walk out on stage and have thousands of people there, all waiting and knowing exactly what they've come for, expecting to be transported, or waiting to see if you fall on your face. The pressure was enormous. And then I had already been an international star for years. I'd been applauded for hours together of my lifetime. They say that Alexander, when he found there were no new worlds to conquer, wept. I understand that. I lived my life like a nun. Work, work, from the time I was a child. And I had achieved everything I had set out to do in full measure. There really was nothing left in the world of opera for me, and yet the drive, the need to conquer new things was there still. And then there was the fear that often, when I was alone, would rear its head. The fear that my voice might perhaps fail me. I remember so many times saying to Tita, Tita, I can't go on. It's my voice. I'm afraid that I'm not ready. Tell them to wait. Tita, just walk with me a little way, just to the edge of the theater. Yes, I am the greatest singer in the world. Oh, no. I would never let them see that I'm afraid. A few months after our initial meeting, I was to sing for a benefit for the Légion d'honneur in Paris. And as is the way with these things, telegrams and flowers arrived from all over the world. And that morning, among the other flowers, was a giant bouquet of red roses. And I looked at the card on it, and it simply said, Aristotle Onassis. And then around noon, more flowers arrived, and among them was another giant bouquet, just like the first one. And this one simply said, Aristotle. And that night, when I left for the theater, there was a third bouquet. This card said, best wishes, in Greek. And I said to Tita, what a romantic he is. It's strange. And yet, the memory of this man's voice is carved in my heart. Is it even possible, do you think, to have a serious love? That would bring such joy to my foolish existence. Estrano, estrano, in cori scopito quegli accenti. Saria per mi sventura un serio amore. dolce delizia. Then, it was 1959. Tita and I had been married for 10 years. And I felt it was important to make a public showing. So we celebrated our anniversary at a very intimate tete-a-tete dinner at Maxime's. Of course, the reporters were there, as always. And afterwards, they asked me to make a statement. And I told them, if Tita wanted me to give up singing, I would do it for him. After all, if I am the voice, he is the soul. But I had already begun to separate my money from him without his knowing it. Then there was an opening in London, and Mr. and Mrs. Onassis requested the pleasure of the star, Maria Callas, at a ball. Tita and I were not unaccustomed to luxury, but I had never seen anything like it. The entire hotel was decorated in pink roses. Everything you can imagine to eat or drink was there. And all of these wonderful, beautiful people that I so much longed to be a part of. And of course, Onassis was beside me, talking to me, seeing that everything I wanted was just as it should be, and all the time importuning, please, 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 as he had really from the beginning, wouldn't we please come on a cruise on the Christina? Tita didn't like these people, and he didn't want to go, but I wanted to go very much. And after persuading Tita that with all of the radio telephones there were aboard the Christina, he would be able to keep up with his business, he at last agreed, and we set a date, and we went on a cruise on the Christina. The Christina was absolutely fabulous, just as you have heard. There was a great lounge with a lapis lazuli fireplace. There were gold faucets in the bathrooms. And it was the custom aboard ship every night to have cocktails on the bridge and watch the sunset. Of course, we weren't the only people along. I remember, among others, there were Sir Winston Churchill and his wife, and their canary, and his doctor and his masseuse. And Tita was grumpy and didn't feel well, and he stayed in his cabin. And it was almost as though the gods conspired to bring us together, because a big storm blew up in the Mediterranean. And everyone stayed below, but not Ari, and not Maria. We spent our time sitting and talking. He told me all about his boyhood in the Mediterranean, about how he had welded this entire empire from nothing. He was fascinating. I had never met anyone who had more drive, more determination, more personal power than this man. He told me his father's name was Socrates and his uncle was Homer. We talked about creating an opera in Monte Carlo, about making films. He was fascinating. when he talked about Smyrna, the island where he grew up, I realized that we could simply go there. We could sail there and see it. So we changed our course, and we did. We sailed to Smyrna, and we walked around all of these places where he had been as a boy. We saw even some of the people he had known. And his eyes were so full of pride and of love, I imagined. Then, after 3 more days sailing, we came to Istanbul, where it had been arranged that there would be a big mass in one of the great basilicas there. The Mediterranean sun was white hot on the steps of the church, and of course there were all the reporters. But inside the church it was dark and cool, and there were little candles way down at the back. And somehow Ari and I ended up kneeling side by side for the Archbishop's blessing. He called me a true daughter of Greece, the greatest singer in the world. And Ari he called the new Homer. I was so proud of him. I was so in love with him. And I felt somehow kneeling here that this was a blessing of our union. Of course, my life was a shambles, and I had to do something about it. As soon as we were back at the ship and I was alone with Tito, I told him, Tito, I'm in love with Ari. I don't care what you think. I don't want to know. Where have you been these last few days? Couldn't you see what was happening? No. It's not temporary. It's not going to change. I'm in love with him, and that's how it's going to be. Well, you can imagine the rest of the cruise was crazy. A whole week I would fight all night with Tita, and then in the daytime try to present some semblance of decorum, try to find time to be with Ari. At the end of that week, the crew were making bets as to who would leave the ship with whom. But I had my sense of propriety. I left with Tita, and Ari left with his wife. And Tita and I went back to Sirmione in Italy, to our home. But we hadn't been there very long before I heard a noise outside. And there was Ari. Maria, I've come to take you with me. I want to marry you. Well, he came into the house, and Tita yelled at Ari, and Ari yelled at Tita, and I cried, and Tita cried, and Ari cried. But at 4 o'clock that morning, I put some things in a suitcase, and Ari and I left for Milan together. And then, with the whole world watching, we tried to sort out our lives. My marriage ended. His marriage ended. But somehow, our marriage never materialized. Still, we were very happy together. We were very much in love. I performed less and less. You see, Ari really lived 24 hours around the clock. He didn't really have a home other than the Christina. As long as there was a telephone and a nightclub, he was in business, literally. And I was fascinated by his business. I enjoyed very much learning about it. We talked about doing mutual ventures together. But you see, I had always lived my personal life out on stage. And once I began to live my life with Ari, that stream was divided. And it became more and more difficult to perform. And always the press. Can Callas stay up all night talking and still perform? Other singers would cancel, and it was nothing. But Callas cancels, and it's because she is thoughtless, it's because she is heartless. In 1961, I was singing Medea at La Scala. And my voice was weak. And in the first act, I just went on singing. But they started to hiss. The snakes, the hissing snakes up there in the gallery, trying to disrupt me. I just went on till I came to a place toward the end of the first act where Medea says, "Cruel man, crudele," and everything stops. And it's the singer who gives the cue to go on. The conductor can't do anything. And I went to the edge of the stage and I looked up there and I sang, "Crudele, crudele." And I looked up there, I looked at everyone there. If they hated me, I hated them just as much. This was my stage, and I would keep it as long as I wanted it. And then, when I was good and ready, I said the next line. "I gave you everything." The years went by, 2 years, 4 years. Ari could be cruel. He'd said one time, "You only have a tin whistle in your throat, and that doesn't work." And yet, he was there for me when I collapsed after a performance. He was there when I sang my last Tosca. During those years, we met so many people and entertained them on the Christina. Among them were Lee and Stash Radziwill. Lee was the younger sister of President Kennedy's wife, Jacqueline Kennedy. And when Mrs. Kennedy lost her baby, Ari immediately cabled her that he would like to put the Christina at her disposal to recuperate. I didn't like it, and I didn't want to go. And then Ari said that he didn't think I should go, but it wasn't appropriate for his mistress to be aboard with the president's wife. He was such an addict for publicity, and this woman was in a white-hot circle of world attention. He couldn't resist. So I stayed. And they went on their cruise, and I watched on television as Mrs. Kennedy became more relaxed and more tanned. He even took her to Smyrna, to the same places that he had taken me. When the cruise was over, Lee had a pearl bracelet, but Jackie had a ruby and pearl necklace. One of the White House aides said, "Jackie has stars in her eyes, Greek stars." Then she was the young widow, and Ari was there to comfort her and protect her and be at her side. And finally there came a day when he said, "I'm going on a cruise and I want you to stay in Paris." "Who's going on this cruise with you?" As if I didn't know. "Well, I'll tell you something, Ari. If you go on this cruise, we are finished." "No, I won't be here when you get back. We are through." And so they went on their cruise with the whole world watching. And I flew to the United States, and I went to Los Angeles and St. Louis, and I went to Santa Fe and Las Vegas, and everywhere the reporters, Miss Callas, tell us, how do you feel about this impending marriage?" Well, I could have preferred that things had been different. One does not like to lose. How could he be so cruel?
How could anybody be so cruel? I have lived my life for my art. And I have lived for love. Oh, God. How can you repay me this way?
The night of their wedding, I went to Maxime's, dressed in brocade and pearls, and I danced till 3 o'clock in the morning. It was only days till he was back in touch with me. And months, weeks really, till there were cracks in that marriage, public cracks. Of course, I had to find something to do. I thought if I could work again, but I couldn't bring myself to do a full-length opera. Still, I thought perhaps a concert tour would be the thing, and the bookings simply poured in. We began in Germany, Stuttgart, Berlin, and the reviews were disastrous. A voice in ruins. But I told my friends, I know that it will be better as we go on, it will improve. So I went on to London, to Japan, and finally I came to New York, to Carnegie Hall. And the afternoon of my concert, I received word that Saul Hurok, my dear friend, the impresario, had died suddenly. I was absolutely distraught. I didn't see how I could go on, and yet I simply could not face these jackals. Callas cancels again. So I went on. I explained about Saul, but it was a nightmare. I would never know from the beginning of one phrase to the next whether I would even be able to hit the notes. And yet, they applauded and applauded. Someone came up to me after the singing was finished and gave me a bouquet of roses. And I looked at the card, and they were from Saul. He must have sent them just before he died. I simply fell apart. I started to talk. I said, you don't know what it's like for young singers today to try and make some kind of sense out of an operatic career. You're expected to fly in somewhere and sing with people you have never met. And it is not possible. Things are not run in such a way that a singer has any hope of being able to do art. I couldn't stop myself. I went on, and finally a man called out from the audience, "You are opera." I left the stage and I waited backstage, and then I went to the stage door to leave, and I still had Saul's roses in my arms, and I opened the door. And there they were. Hundreds of them. I took a rose and threw it. And then another. Till they were all gone. Ari's life began to crumble. His son was killed suddenly. His ex-wife died. His daughter made a bad marriage. His financial empire began to slip. And through it all, it was I who comforted him. It was to me that he came. And when he lost his beloved Olympia Airlines, he just collapsed. He was only a broken old man at the end. But he was my love. There he was in the hospital. And I couldn't be with him because I was not his wife. And his wife didn't seem to be able to get there. But I had friends and they kept me informed. It was obvious that we were just waiting for him to die, and I couldn't stand it any longer, so I flew to Palm Springs. And I took a lot of pills for a long time. But after all, if one is alive, one must live. So I went back to Paris. But I was not seen much. Or I would make plans with my friends. then I would cancel them. Alan Severite, the journalist, asked me if he could do an interview. I told him, go listen to the tapes. It's all on the tapes. Callas is dead. That summer, just before I died, I went to the Isle of Scorpios, and I spent hours kneeling by Ari's tomb and praying. The sun was brilliant white. You could smell the heat on the hillside, on the sea, and you could hear the locusts. And what was in my mind as I knelt there all that time praying? Music, like a great river, all the music from all the nights. And I was on stage singing, but I wasn't afraid. Tosca, Violetta, Norma. The lights would go down in the house, and the music would swell up out of the pit, and I would sing. All the beautiful, smiling dreams were gone. Oh God, forgive him for abandoning me. It is all finished.